got to see. Oh, my God! I'm gorgeous!
What happens when a perfect sitcom gets old? The jokes get stale and the plots get weird. We're counting down 20 shows that should have quit while they were ahead. One even replaced its main star with a completely different actor and pretended we wouldn't notice. 1. Family Matters.
Hi, Carl.
Don't you think you ought to start calling me Mr. Winslow?
Yeah, that's what my parents Herb and Diane tell me.
Let's kick things off with a show that started as a sweet family comedy and ended up as something from another planet. Family Matters was originally a spin-off from the show Perfect Strangers, centered on the Winslow family. You had Carl, the police officer dad, Harriet, the smart and loving mom, and their 3 kids. It was a nice, normal show about a middle-class family in Chicago. For about 5 minutes anyway. In the middle of the first season, they introduced a new character. He was the nerdy next-door neighbor with huge glasses, suspenders held up to his chin, and a voice that could shatter glass. His name was Steve Urkel. At first, he was just a funny side character who would pop in, annoy Carl, say his catchphrase, "Did I do that?" and leave. But here's the thing, people went absolutely bonkers for Urkel. He was a sensation. The producers saw this and decided to give the people what they wanted. More Urkel. A lot more Urkel. Soon, the show wasn't about the Winslows anymore. It was the Urkel Show. The plots became more and more ridiculous. Steve built a robot version of himself named Urkelbot. He invented a transformation chamber that would turn him into a cool, handsome guy named Stefan Urquell. He even traveled through time and went into outer space. The actual Winslow family members started disappearing, with the youngest daughter Judy walking upstairs one day and literally never being seen or mentioned again. By the time the show finally ended after 9 seasons, it was a bizarre science fiction cartoon that had completely forgotten the charming family it was once about. A nerdy neighbor slowly taking over a show is one thing. But what happens when a beloved show is almost completely destroyed in a single season by a crazy plot twist that nobody saw coming? 2. Roseanne.
Now, David, I'm learning useful things. I'm growing as a person.
You're in the Urkel chat room.
For most of its run, Roseanne was one of the most important and realistic sitcoms ever made. It showed a working-class American family, the Connors, who struggled with money, argued with each other, but still loved each other fiercely. It was funny, it was honest, and it felt real. Roseanne, Dan, Becky, Darlene, and DJ felt like a family you could actually know. They dealt with real-life problems in a way that television had rarely seen before. For 8 seasons, it was a masterpiece. And then came season 9. After years of being the poster family for just getting by, the Connors won the state lottery. They won $108 million. Suddenly, the family that clipped coupons and worried about paying the bills was flying on private jets and getting makeovers. The entire premise of the show, the very thing that made it special, was thrown out the window. The plots in the final season were completely bonkers. Roseanne was hanging out with supermodels and rich people. The family went to a fancy spa where they imagined they were characters in classic TV shows. It was a mess. But the absolute craziest part came in the very last episode. In a voiceover, Roseanne revealed that the entire 9th season was a lie. She explained that she had made it all up as a story she was writing. In reality, they never won the lottery. And even more shockingly, she revealed that her husband Dan hadn't survived his heart attack from the end of season 8. It was a gut punch to the audience who had followed this family for nearly a decade. The showrunners basically admitted the final season was a mistake by erasing it, but the damage was already done. Roseanne was ruined by a sudden pile of money, but our next show wasn't ruined by money. It was ruined when the main couple finally found love. 3. The Nanny.
Hey, Hey, be nicer to your sister.
Why? Because we're a family?
Yes, that's right. And someday your father's gonna be old and sick. You're gonna want him to live with her.
The entire point of The Nanny was the delicious tension between the two main characters. You had Fran Fine, the flashy girl from Flushing with a foghorn voice and a heart of gold. Then you had Maxwell Sheffield, the handsome and very proper British Broadway producer she worked for. She was the nanny to his 3 kids, and from the very first episode, everyone could see that these two opposites were meant to be together. The show got 6 seasons of comedy gold out of their will-they-won't-they relationship. The fun of the show was watching them almost get together, only to have something get in the way. There was Maxwell's snooty business partner, C.C. Babcock, who was also in love with him. There was the hilarious butler, Niles, who was always trying to push Fran and Maxwell together. For 5 seasons, this formula worked perfectly. The jokes were sharp, the characters were lovable, and the central romance kept everyone hooked. Then, at the end of season 5, it finally happened. Maxwell proposed to Fran, and they got married. And just like that, the show's engine ran out of gas. The 6th and final season felt like a completely different show. The tension was gone. The fun of their back and forth was replaced with boring married life storylines. They even had Fran give birth to twins, which is a classic sign that a sitcom has run out of ideas. The show tried to keep things interesting by having Niles and CC get together, but it wasn't enough. Once Fran and Maxwell were a happy couple, the magic was gone, and it was clear the show should have ended with their wedding. The will-they-won't-they tension disappearing is a classic show killer. But sometimes the problem is that the entire premise has to change, like when a teenage witch suddenly has to go off to college. 4. Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Where's the salsa?
Over here, but it's kind of spicy.
I think I can handle it, Kat.
For its first 4 seasons, Sabrina the Teenage Witch was a perfect Friday night show. It was part of ABC's famous TGIF lineup and followed Sabrina Spellman, a high school girl who finds out on her 16th birthday that she's a witch. The show was a blast. She lived with her 2 cool, eccentric aunts, Hilda and Zelda, and their talking cat, Salem. The early seasons were all about Sabrina learning to use her powers, getting into magical trouble at school, and trying to keep her big secret from her friends and her boyfriend Harvey. The show had a great mix of high school problems and magical silliness. Sabrina might accidentally turn a mean cheerleader into a pineapple or zap herself back in time. It was fun, light, and charming. Then Sabrina graduated from high school, and this is where things started to go wrong. The show moved from the ABC network to the WB network, and the setting changed from high school to college. This is known as the college years curse, and it hit Sabrina hard. Sabrina moved out of her aunt's house and into a dorm with new characters who just weren't as interesting. Her aunts, who were the heart of the show, were barely in it anymore. The magical world and the human world felt more separated, and the plots became less creative. She even broke up with Harvey for a while. The show limped on for 3 more seasons in this new format, but it never recaptured the magic of those early years. It felt like a spin-off of itself. Leaving home for college can really change a show's vibe. But what about a family show where the home itself just gets way too crowded with new characters that nobody asked for? 5. Step by Step.
I'm Cody. I'm Frank's nephew. I live in the van in the driveway.
Oh, right. I'm Carol, Frank's wife. She lives in the house by the driveway.
Here's another TGIF classic that started strong and then fizzled out. Step by Step was a modern take on the Brady Bunch. It starred Patrick Duffy as Frank Lambert, a laid-back dad with 3 kids, and Suzanne Summers as Carol Foster, an organized mom with 3 kids. They meet on vacation, get married instantly, and have to figure out how to blend their 2 very different families together. The early seasons were full of funny conflicts between the jock Lambert kids and the nerdy Foster kids. It was a simple, winning formula. The show was a solid hit for its first few seasons. The chemistry between the cast was great, and the family situations were relatable, even if they were a bit silly. But as the show went on, the writers started to run out of ideas. First, they added a new character, Frank's goofy nephew Cody, played by Sasha Mitchell. Cody was a fun addition for a while, with his van parked in the driveway and his simple-minded wisdom. But then, the actor was let go from the show, and Cody just vanished without a real explanation. The show was already feeling a bit tired, but then it pulled out the ultimate sitcom move for a series running on fumes. It introduced a new baby. Carol and Frank had a daughter named Lily. Adding a new baby to a crowded cast rarely makes a show better, and it didn't help here. The older kids' storylines became less important, and the show started to feel even more generic. It ran for 7 seasons, but by the end, the fresh concept of two families blending together had become a stale and overcrowded mess. Adding a baby is a common trick when sitcoms run out of ideas. But what if a show adds a baby and it creates a confusing story that makes absolutely no sense at all? 6. Mad About You.
The Buckmans are trapped in 11D.
Honey, you're talking to Murray. He gets confused playing fetch.
Mad About You was a smart and funny show that was a huge hit for NBC in the 90s. It starred Paul Reiser and Helen Hunt as Paul and Jamie Buckman, a newly married couple living in New York City. The show was all about the little moments in a relationship, the funny arguments, the sweet gestures, and the challenges of navigating life together. For its first few seasons, it was one of the sharpest comedies on TV. Paul and Jamie felt like a real couple, and their chemistry was fantastic. The show was so popular that it ran for 7 seasons. But as the years went on, the quality started to dip. The stories that were once clever and relatable started to feel a bit forced. A big turning point for many fans was when Paul and Jamie had a baby, a daughter named Mabel. While having a baby is a natural step for a couple, on a sitcom, it can often signal the beginning of the end. The focus shifted from the couple's relationship to the challenges of parenting, and some of the show's original spark was lost. However, the real crime came in the final season. The show did a massive time jump, flashing forward 22 years into the future to show what happened to Paul, Jamie, and a grown-up Mabel. The finale was confusing and, for many fans, deeply unsatisfying. It revealed that Paul and Jamie had actually split up for a while, which felt like a betrayal of the couple everyone had grown to love. The show even had a revival in 2019, which ignored that weird finale completely, proving that even the creators knew they had gone way too far. A confusing finale can definitely sour an entire series. But it's even worse when a show's quality dips, because the main star has to leave for a very serious reason, forcing a massive change. 7. Spin City.
Stacy, come in here a second.
What do you want?
Just wanted to see if it worked.
When Spin City premiered in 1996, it was an instant hit. The show had a fantastic cast led by the incredibly talented Michael J. Fox. He played Mike Flaherty, the deputy mayor of New York City, who had to manage a goofy staff and a well-meaning but clueless mayor. The show was fast-paced, full of witty dialogue, and Michael J. Fox was at the top of his comedic game. It was one of the best new sitcoms of the decade. Behind the scenes, however, Michael J. Fox was dealing with a serious personal health challenge. He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease years earlier, but had kept it private. As his condition progressed, it became more difficult for him to handle the demands of a weekly sitcom. At the end of the show's 4th season, he made the difficult decision to leave the show to focus on his health and advocacy work. His final episode was emotional and beautifully done. The network, however, wasn't ready to say goodbye to the hit show. So they made a bold move. They hired a new lead actor, Charlie Sheen, to replace Michael J. Fox. Charlie played a new character named Charlie Crawford, who took over Mike's job. While Charlie Sheen is a capable sitcom actor, the change was just too much for the show to handle. The entire dynamic shifted. The witty, fast-paced humor was replaced with a different style of comedy that didn't quite fit the other characters. The show was never the same, and it felt like a completely different series. It managed to stay on the air for 2 more seasons, but the magic was gone. Losing a beloved star is a huge challenge for any show. But what about a show that lost its way, not because of who left, but because of where the characters went? 8. Coach.
No matter how many times I come out here, I never get tired of it. Just a feeling of tranquility you can't find anyplace else.
For most of its run, Coach was a simple and lovable sitcom. It starred Craig T. Nelson as Hayden Fox, the grumpy but lovable head coach of the Minnesota State University Screaming Eagles football team. The show wasn't really about football. It was about Coach Fox's relationships with his girlfriend-turned-wife Christine, his estranged daughter Kelly, and his 2 hilarious assistant coaches, Luther and Dauber. The small-town college setting was a huge part of its charm. The show was a solid performer for ABC for 7 seasons. The characters were well-defined, the jokes were funny, and the stories were heartwarming. It was a classic comfort food sitcom. But after 7 seasons, the creators decided to shake things up in a big way. They had Coach Fox get his dream job, becoming the head coach of a professional NFL team. This meant the show had to completely change its setting and premise. Coach Fox, Christine, and his assistants, Luther and Dauber, all moved to Orlando, Florida, to work for a fictional expansion team called the Orlando Breakers. All the beloved supporting characters from the college, like the athletic director and Kelly's husband, were gone. The new setting just didn't work. The cozy, small-town feel was replaced by a generic professional sports environment. The show lost its heart and felt like it was drifting without a purpose. It lasted for 2 more seasons in this new format before finally being canceled, long after its glory days in Minnesota. A change of scenery can be a death sentence for a sitcom. The next show on our list kept the same scenery, but it simply ran out of stories for its cast of quirky airport workers. 9. Wings.
You're already a very, very good-looking... Not to me.
Wings was a classic workplace comedy from the creators of Cheers. Set in a small airport in Nantucket, the show revolved around 2 brothers, Joe and Brian Hackett, who ran a tiny airline. The cast was filled with hilarious and quirky characters like the grumpy rival airline owner Roy, the spacey mechanic Lowell, and the airport's lunch counter operator, Helen Chappell. For the first half of its run, the show was a well-oiled machine, full of clever jokes and great character moments. A huge part of the show's story was the long-running will-they-won't-they romance between Joe and his childhood friend, Helen. Their relationship was the emotional core of the series. After 6 seasons of build-up, they finally got married. And just like with The Nanny, once the central romance was resolved, the show seemed to lose a bit of its direction. But that wasn't the only problem. As the show entered its later seasons, the cast started to change. Thomas Hayden Church, who played the clueless mechanic Lowell, left the show after season 6. His replacement just didn't have the same goofy charm. Then, in the final season, Helen and Joe's main romantic storyline was over, and it felt like the writers were struggling to find things for them to do. The show had a great run for 8 seasons, but by the end, it was clear that most of the interesting stories had already been told. The once bustling Nantucket Airport was starting to feel awfully quiet. Running out of stories is a common problem for long-running shows. But some shows start with a gimmick so specific you just know it can't last forever, like a family of aliens pretending to be human. 10th. Third Rock from the Sun.
I've got to see! Oh, my God! I'm gorgeous!
When Third Rock from the Sun debuted, there was nothing else like it on television. The premise was brilliant. A group of 4 aliens comes to Earth on an exploratory mission and takes on human bodies to blend in. Their leader, the High Commander, becomes a middle-aged college professor named Dick Solomon. His crew becomes his family, his sister Sally, his brother Harry, and his son Tommy. The comedy came from them trying to understand bizarre human behaviors like jealousy, love, and sarcasm. The cast was incredible, especially John Lithgow as the hilariously over-the-top Dick Solomon. The first few seasons were genius. Watching the aliens experience everything for the first time was consistently funny. The writing was sharp and inventive, and the physical comedy was top-notch. The show was a huge critical and popular success, winning a ton of awards. But here's the problem with a high-concept show like this. The gimmick can only stay fresh for so long. After a while, the joke of aliens don't understand human stuff started to wear thin. How long can they be on Earth and still be completely clueless about everything? The writers had to come up with more and more outlandish plots to keep things interesting. The show ran for 6 seasons, but by the last couple of years, the once brilliant concept had started to feel repetitive. The aliens had learned most of what there was to learn, and the show had lost its element of surprise. A high-concept gimmick can get tired, for sure. But what about a show with a very simple premise that just became a cartoonish version of itself over the years? 11th, Home Improvement.
You get to take stuff for granted after a while, you know. Don't respect it like you should. Know what I'm getting at?
Not even close, Tim.
More power. In the 90s, you couldn't escape Tim, the tool man, Taylor. Home Improvement, starring comedian Tim Allen, was one of the biggest shows in the world. It was a classic family sitcom about Tim, the host of a local hardware show called Tool Time, his patient wife Jill, and their 3 sons, Brad, Randy, and Mark. The show was hugely popular because it was relatable. Tim was the goofy dad who loved tools and cars, and his relationship with his family was the heart of the show. For the first 5 or 6 seasons, Home Improvement was on top of its game. The dynamic between Tim and Jill was great. The kids were cute, and Tim's interactions with his co-host Al and his mysterious neighbor Wilson were always funny. The show had a simple, effective formula. Tim would try to improve something, it would go horribly wrong, he'd get some weird advice from Wilson over the backyard fence, and he'd learn a lesson. But after running for 8 seasons and over 200 episodes, that formula got really old. Tim's character never seemed to learn anything. He kept making the same grunting, power-obsessed mistakes week after week. The kids grew up, and their storylines became less interesting. Jonathan Taylor Thomas, who played the popular middle son Randy, left the show before the final season, which was a huge blow. By the end, the show felt like a parody of itself. The jokes were predictable, and the charm had worn off. It was a classic case of a good show that just didn't know when to pack up its tools. A show becoming a parody of itself is sad to watch. But our next show didn't just get repetitive, it got so sweet and predictable that it felt like you were watching the same exact episode every week. 12th, Full House.
Can you help me? And what did I just put in my mouth?
Yes, and flounder tart.
You got it, dude. Full House was the ultimate feel-good family sitcom of the late 80s and early 90s. The premise was a bit strange when you think about it. A widowed father, Danny Tanner, asks his rock musician brother-in-law, Jesse, and his stand-up comedian best friend, Joey, to move in and help him raise his 3 young daughters, DJ, Stephanie, and Michelle. The show was a massive hit, especially with younger audiences. It was known for its cute kids, silly catchphrases, and heartwarming moments. In the early seasons, the show was genuinely charming. The chemistry between the 3 men was funny, and the problems the girls went through felt real for a kid's show. It was a sweet, innocent program that you could watch with the whole family. It was never a show praised by critics, but audiences loved it, and they loved it for a long, long time. The show ran for 8 full seasons. The problem was, the show never grew up with its audience. As the girls got older, the storyline stayed stuck in the same simple, predictable pattern. Every single episode followed the same structure. One of the kids would have a problem. They would try to solve it and make it worse. One of the three dads would sit them down on their bed. Some sentimental music would start playing, and a lesson would be learned, followed by a group hug. After a while, this became incredibly repetitive and overly sappy. The show that was once sweet and charming just became cheesy and predictable. Too much sweetness can be a bad thing. But what about a show that was never sweet to begin with and just got meaner and more stale as the years went by? 13. Married with Children.
I just love Mommy and you. Daddy. There's not another who can take it.
Married with Children was the anti-family sitcom. At a time when TV was filled with loving families like the Huxtables and the Tanners, along came the Bundys. Al Bundy was a miserable shoe salesman who hated his life. His wife Peggy was lazy and loved to spend his money. Their daughter Kelly was not the sharpest tool in the shed, and their son Bud was just plain unpopular. They were the most dysfunctional family on television, and for a while, it was hilarious. The show was a huge hit for the brand new Fox network because it was so different. It was rude, it was crude, and it broke all the rules of what a sitcom was supposed to be. Al Bundy's constant complaining and sarcastic put-downs were a breath of fresh air for viewers tired of perfect TV families. The show pushed the envelope and was often in the news for its raunchy humor. But the show ran for a staggering 11 seasons. That's an eternity in television. And after a while, the jokes started to wear thin. There's only so many times you can hear Al complain about his job or Peggy refuse to cook. The shock value that made the show so exciting in the beginning eventually faded. The characters never changed or grew, which was part of the point, but it also made the show feel stuck in a rut. Later seasons introduced new characters, like the neighbor Marcy's new husband, Jefferson, and a kid named Seven, who was just there for a while and then disappeared. The show that was once a rebellious rule breaker just became an old, tired grump. Married, with Children pushed boundaries, but it always knew it was a comedy. The next show on our list was a family sitcom that got lost when it tried to tackle serious grown-up problems. 14. Boy Meets World.
Alan, remember how we were worried about Eric's F-U-T-U-R-E?
Oh, Ma, you don't have to worry about my furniture.
For many kids who grew up in the 90s, Boy Meets World wasn't just a show. It was a guide to growing up. We followed Corey Matthews from his awkward middle school days all the way through high school. We saw his friendship with the cool but troubled Sean Hunter, his epic romance with the smart and quirky Topanga, and his life lessons from the wise Mr. Feeney. The high school seasons of the show are nearly perfect. They were funny, heartfelt, and dealt with real issues in a way that felt authentic. The show was so beloved that it followed the characters after they graduated high school. Corey, Topanga, Sean, and Corey's brother Eric all went off to Pembroke University. And that's when the show started to lose its way. The college years were a huge shift in tone. The stories became more about adult relationships and less about the challenges of growing up. The show started to get a bit strange. Characters' personalities changed. Eric, who was once a cool older brother, became a complete goofball who was almost cartoonishly silly. The plots became more serious and sometimes melodramatic. Corey and Topanga even got married while they were still in college. While it was great to see these characters continue their journey, the show lost a lot of the innocent charm and relatable humor that made the early seasons so special. It ran for 3 seasons in college, but for many fans, the real story ended at high school graduation. Growing up is tough, both for characters and for the shows about them. But it's even tougher when real-life problems behind the camera start to tear a beloved show apart. 15. Grace Under Fire.
Clowns aren't really happy. It's just the alcohol. Well, drunk or sober, they make me laugh.
Grace Under Fire was a massive hit when it premiered in 1993. The show starred the brilliant comedian Brett Butler as Grace Kelly, a single mom of 3 who had just left an unhealthy marriage and was starting her life over. She got a job working at an oil refinery, a tough, male-dominated environment. The show was praised for its realistic portrayal of a working-class woman trying to make it on her own. It was funny, but it also had a lot of heart and wasn't afraid to tackle serious issues. Brett Butler was amazing in the lead role, and the show was a top 10 hit for its first few seasons. It was a cornerstone of ABC's schedule and seemed like it would be on the air for a long time. But behind the scenes, things were becoming very difficult. The star of the show, Brett Butler, was battling some serious personal struggles. These off-screen issues began to affect the production of the show. There were reports of erratic behavior on set, causing delays and tension among the cast and crew. As the turmoil continued, the quality of the show began to decline. Some young actors on the show even left because the environment had become too stressful. The network tried to keep things going, but it became impossible. After 5 seasons, ABC abruptly canceled the show, not even airing the final few episodes that had already been filmed. It was a sad end to a show that had started with so much promise. Behind-the-scenes drama can end a show abruptly. But what about a show that just quietly faded away after its central romance finally fizzled out? 16. Caroline in the City.
This is the specialty of the house, my mother's own recipe.
Well, then your mother has 2 things to be sorry for.
Caroline in the City was a key part of NBC's must-see TV lineup in the mid-90s, airing right between Seinfeld and ER. The show starred Leah Thompson as Caroline Duffy, a cartoonist in Manhattan who drew a popular comic strip based on her life. The main story, however, was her relationship with her colorist, Richard Korinsky, played by Malcolm Getz. Richard was secretly in love with Caroline, and the show was built around the classic will-they-won't-they dynamic between them. For the first couple of seasons, the show was a charming and funny romantic comedy. The supporting cast, including Caroline's sarcastic friend Annie and her goofy ex-boyfriend Del, were great. The audience was hooked on the central question: when would Caroline realize that the perfect guy was right in front of her? The slow burn of their romance was what kept people tuning in week after week. Then, in the 3rd season, they finally got together. And just like we've seen before, once the main romantic tension was resolved, the show didn't know what to do with itself. The writers tried to keep things interesting by breaking them up and getting them back together, but it just felt messy. The show was moved around on the schedule, and its ratings started to drop. After 4 seasons, NBC canceled the show on a massive cliffhanger, with Richard about to marry another woman and Caroline showing up at his wedding. Fans never got to see how it ended, but truth be told, most had stopped caring by then.